Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. Now we have very distinguished guests here with us. My name is Aynur Tattersol. I am a journalist. I'm not going to read the whole resume of our speakers, but when the time comes, I'm going to mention their titles. Our topic today is ceasefire in Ukraine, looking for honest brokers. It is a very challenging and sad subject. We don't know where this war is going to leading us to. Human drama is still underway. People are dying, infrastructure destroyed, and the prospect for a wider war, including NATO countries and neighboring countries, it is still not out of question. Before me going further, I'd like to turn to our speakers. I have 3 questions in this session I'm going to ask our speakers, and I need the answer for. So, are we going to see the end of this terrible war? This is my first question that we will seek for the answer. And the second one, do we think the conflict spread NATO territory and the neighboring countries? If so, how can we actually avoid this? And which countries can help broker a peace deal that will be satisfactory both Ukraine and Russia? Before we go to seek these answers, I think it is better to just define what is honest broker is. So maybe before we were talking to Anna. Anna is from Swedish Institute of International Affairs, from International Affairs. Yes, Anna, would you be kind to just define us first what is honest broker mean?
I'll try to define what an honest broker is. So I think we all know what a dishonest broker is. In an ideal world, an honest broker is someone who is completely impartial and has the desire to bring the 2 parties or the parties in a conflict together and to reach a solution that is satisfactory to both parties. In history, I think one that comes to mind, which is not an honest broker, I would like to say that the United States, for example, in the Arab-Israeli conflict, is not an honest broker, hasn't been an honest broker. But that is not to say that some passages through time were successful. And as we all know, the conflict is still going on. In this particular conflict, and I'm not going to go into that because we're going to do that here, I think there is no real honest broker, but that doesn't mean that we might not find solutions. So I think in this we have to look at what are our shared interests and how can we best come to a solution to avoid, first of all, of course, the continuation of the war, but looking at impacts, for example, such as energy security, economic repercussions in the world, food security. So in this sense, let's throw out the honest broker, but look at who can find commonalities and interests. So,
okay, yes. Thank you, Anna. If we come back to the first question, Suat Kınıklıoğlu is an academic and a former politician. Suat, is this, are we going to see the end of this terrible war?
Okay. Yes. One order of business. If someone can turn off that air conditioner, that would be great. If you want me to continue to speak or change the direction of that, thank you. Let's start with terminology. Thank you, Aynur. We should not call this only a war, although it is a war. But what this is that an internationally recognized state has been invaded by a neighboring state. It's an invasion, it's an occupation. Terminology matters, and I think it also defines the discussion. So it's not like two parties are disagreeing on something and they happen to be at war. One side, a very powerful side in this case, has attacked an internationally recognized state, has taken over parts of its territory, has attempted to take over the capital, has failed, and therefore we are here sitting now discussing this. Now, apart from the terminology business, and I really liked Anna's entree into what an honest broker is, the complexity and the significance of this conflict makes defining or finding an honest broker difficult. Secondly, this is an extremely important conflict. You may not feel it as intense in Tanger today, but the North, and I think also for people who are concerned about the global international order, to some extent rules-based order, here is at stake. And how this will end, which will be part of our discussion, whether it will end through mediation, and what the end result will be, what will it look like, and in terms of territory, in terms of the attacking side, the Russian Federation, and the victim in this case, Ukraine, how that will look, will pretty much determine what our global international order is likely to look, or parts of it will be defined how this conflict will end up. Now, I am partial. So what I have to say, please take it that way. I'm very pro-Ukrainian. Because I believe, as I said, the international order here is at stake. Now, the international order has many things you and I don't like. And it is dominated by Western states. But it's just like democracy. Democracy is the worst system, but it's the best one if you compare it with anything else. So the international order here, in what's happening, what's at stake here in Ukraine, who will win and how we'll end up will affect all of us. Some of these interns here now sitting in Tanger and whatever master program you will be going to in the future, or what country you'll be living in, it will affect all of us. Because a state has been occupied blatantly in daylight robbery. Although its leader and his whole political cadre were saying, no, we are not going to invade Ukraine. 190,000 troops entered a country. They're pillaging, they're raping women, they are instituting warfare of Middle Age standards. So 16th century, 17th century warfare is being executed in daylight, sometimes live on television. So, can we find honest brokers? My president claims he is an honest broker. To some extent, he is, to some extent, red, bold, italic, because Turkey is one of those rare countries that has good relations with both of these countries, which is very difficult because this conflict has such, I'm too long, two more sentences. Because this conflict has so polarized the global community, it's very difficult to find who can speak to both President Zelensky and President Putin.
This is what I was coming next, Suat, if you don't mind. Because you have depth knowledge and Turkey's role is important. So I'm going to come back to you about the Turkey's,
I'll stop
if you don't mind. Milos is think tanker. Of course, there are so many other he has in his resume. But Milos, can you please tell us, are we going to see the end of this terrible war? And what is your view on that?
Thank you for this. Firstly, I have to say I must agree with the colleagues who spoke previously about the problem of defining the honest broker. It seems that in this war, in this invasion, in this situation, there is hardly anyone that is fully honest, or that can be fully honest. There are multiple stakes in this whole terrible and unfortunate situation. What I wanted to add to this discussion as a European and coming from Serbia is one thing that is close to my heart, I believe in, and I think there is also some rationality in that, is that in Europe, there's of course the European Union. And it's a peace, it was established as a peace project. So since its establishment, it was like around 70 years, there has been no war on the European soil, at least in that part that we nowadays know it as the EU. Now, in this situation of war and invasion of Ukraine, we know that first, we know a couple of things. First, Ukraine is an EU-associated country. Second, since June this year, Ukraine was also granted a candidacy status to the EU, and also Ukraine is participating in the Partnership for Peace. I am mentioning this because in this situation, the EU has recognized and indicated that they want the Ukraine to be the part of the European family and to have a joint European future with the rest of the EU. I think, and this is really important when you see that there are certain parallels, so to say, with the Western Balkan region, the region that I come from. In my region, there is this constant threat of, or potential threat, so to say, of a conflict, of fallout, of something happening, because the EU path of countries in the Western Balkans have, their path to the EU has been postponed for so long, and there are many what people are usually or frequently refer to as influences from the East. So my point is, the sooner the EU enlarges, right, and integrates other countries that are aspiring, but are somewhere in the middle of these lines of influence, I think that a lasting peace in Europe will be, let's say, easily, we will get easily, not easily, but more easily the lasting peace in Europe. And the circumstances as they are now, with the, let's say, disagreements, if you will, between the West and Russia, with the sanction packages of the EU, which are the largest in the history of the EU, by the way, we cannot see that the resolution or that there will be a peace tomorrow. But what is most important to speak about a peace, at least in my opinion, is to start thinking about how to reestablish contacts between the West and Russia, because I think this is where it is at the moment. This is the line of disagreement.
So, Milos, do you say that will this EU enlargement actually provoke further Russian aggression?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the Europe united and the Europe together, there are far fewer chances that we will get something like this in the future. And I think it will definitely help in finding the peace of the war in Ukraine, but if the EU and the US, namely most importantly, re-engage in the peace talks at some point. And this is something I think we have to work on. This is not a matter of a single country. No, not a single country. No single country will broker peace or single-handedly deliver it. This is about the Ukraine's future at the first place, and then about the joint future.
Yes, thank you. And Omar Mohammed is international lawyer, and he is going to give his talk in French. So if we can take our headsets, will help. Omar, so are we going to see the end of this war, and how and when, and if so?
Oui, bien sûr que toute chose a une fin. C'est normal, mais il faut peut-être créer les conditions de la paix. Aujourd'hui, la situation est que la Russie ne voit pas en son initiative en Ukraine une guerre contre le peuple ukrainien, mais une résistance par rapport à l'offensive de l'OTAN. Cela est historique par rapport dans le paradigme de la Russie, vu que l'Occident a en plusieurs offensives, notamment napoléoniennes et germaniques, a essayé un peu de cerner et de contrôler l'immensité du territoire russe. Donc l'Ukraine, quelque part aujourd'hui, n'est que l'alibi de ce paradigme géostratégique, ce qui voudra dire qu'aujourd'hui, l'OTAN, avec ses alliés et le système de sanctions qui s'en est suivi, nécessite à ce que la société internationale puisse trouver des arbitres ou des médiateurs à l'extérieur de la galaxie des États et des nations qui ont participé aux différentes sanctions. Effectivement, pour trouver cela, ce n'est pas évident. Nous avons tout le continent africain éventuellement qui, par prudence économique et par prudence énergétique, a décidé de ne pas rentrer dans l'aventure des décisions, des sanctions. Donc là, il y a tout un vivier de nations qui pourraient éventuellement participer à cette médiation. Il y a aussi l'expérience turque qui éventuellement essaye de faire rapprocher les différentes positions entre les belligérants. Peut y avoir aussi l'expérience marocaine par rapport à sa médiation au niveau du conflit israélo-palestinien, aussi du conflit libyen ou d'autres conflits en Afrique. Il y a aussi ce référentiel historique qui pourrait justement répondre à la question de la paix. C'est que lorsque la guerre des sables en 63 entre le Maroc et l'Algérie, deux grands voisins de l'Afrique du Nord avaient marqué le début des indépendances, le Maroc a dû, malgré qu'il ait gagné la guerre, a dû céder des territoires à l'Algérie pour éventuellement pouvoir instaurer la paix par rapport à ce qu'on appelle le Sahara oriental. Donc aujourd'hui, moi je pense que le président ukrainien qui a été plus ou moins embarqué dans on va dire dans ce rapport géostratégique, et bien sûr encore une fois je suis impartial, juste j'observe les différents rapports de force. Donc le président ukrainien qui a été embarqué dans la résistance de l'OTAN par rapport à l'immensité russe devrait penser, réfléchir à pouvoir établir une paix contre des territoires. Ça a été une proposition de la France par rapport à cela, ce qui avait créé une indignation de l'opinion publique à l'époque, mais ce n'est pas forcément une mauvaise idée. D'autant plus que nous connaissons les intimités culturelles, sociologiques, historiques entre le peuple russe, les différentes nuances du peuple russe dans le territoire ukrainien ou le territoire russe central, ce qui voudra dire que ça ne devrait pas culturellement créer un problème par rapport à l'annexion de certains territoires si l'Europe, si cette partie du monde peut éventuellement retrouver la paix dans un futur très proche et rétablir les différentes sécurités alimentaires, sécurité humaine et protection des différentes frontières, notamment en Afrique et en Europe.
Thank you, Omar. Suat, so I come to my second questions. Do you think this conflict spread to NATO territory and neighboring countries? So how can we avoid this?
Well, I think it's unlikely to spread at the moment, unless the Belarusians decide to do something crazy. But it seems contained at the moment. But this, I failed to say this at my first intervention, this conflict will only end when Ukraine will recover its territory, liberate its territories that are currently occupied by Russia, including Crimea. Now, will it spread? I mean, as I said, I think we are seeing more and more signs by the Kremlin that they understand their weakness and that the extension, the continuation of this conflict is not in their interest. While they are counting that the Republicans will win in the United States, that the Europeans will eventually feel it's too expensive to support Ukraine and there will be some cracks. But on the other hand, they also have severe weaknesses, and I don't think they will be as crazy enough to spread it to fight with NATO. because their military weaknesses have been horrendous. I mean, they really, if you look at from a purely technical perspective, if you look at the war theater itself, you see a very clumsy, disorganized, corrupt, and extremely badly commanded armed force on the Russian side. Contrary to many descriptions of being a very formidable army. On the other hand, you have a very motivated Ukraine and an armed force. I mean, just give you one example. When Russia invaded Ukraine, within the first week, 62,000 Ukrainian men returned from abroad, outside of the country, back into Ukraine voluntarily to join the Ukrainian army and fight against the invaders. So this is a people that is highly motivated. Public opinion polls show over 70% of support not ending the conflict until Ukrainian territories are liberated. So A, this war is going to continue for some time. B, it's, in my view, at the moment, from what we know at the moment, unlikely to spread to NATO territories, because the Russians know the moment they would attack NATO territory, be it Poland, be it the Baltics, there will be a very severe response. And given the state of their armed forces, that means utter defeat and most likely end of the Putin regime. So I think it will be limited. But can it be totally discounted? Of course it can be not, because there are things that can get out of control. But at the moment, it's unlikely that NATO will be involved. We will see this winter will be a test of how durable support for Ukraine will be, how European societies will deal with higher energy prices, higher inflation, and more stressful economies. But both sides do not seem to be willing to end the conflict at this time. If I may say one thing to Omar, if I have understood you correctly, I think you were referring to a peace deal that would involve annexation of Ukrainian territory to Russia in exchange for peace. Is that correct? Yeah. Well, that would then open the door for any country to attack another country, and then so that we get peace, I get to keep some of what I annexed. So Turkey could go into the Greek islands, and then Algeria and Morocco could do whatever. So I think here we have a problem. Yes, everyone wants peace. Of course we want peace. Who doesn't want peace? But at what price? I respectfully disagree with that French proposal that the Ukrainians should just give up Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk for peace. That's not peace. It may be peace in short term, but it's not peace, because Ukrainians will continue to want to liberate their territory. So I just wanted to make a point of that.
Thank you, Suad. And Anna, may I ask you the same?
I agree with quite a few things that Suad was talking about. I'd like to bring up something that we don't often talk about when it comes to conflicts, and that is how different states are perceived. Psychology, perceptions of power, and how other states show recognition and respect. And now I'm putting on my hat as a historian and as a Swede and as someone living in the United States. And it seems clear to me that of course, I disagree with Russian aggression. It's completely unacceptable. It's a completely unnecessary war. But a lot of people, I think, have missed and kind of misunderstood and kind of disregarded earlier on Putin's inclinations to do what he's doing now. What he's doing now is something that he has been alluding to for a very long time. And earlier on, Western powers have, for example, I think, stood by the side, for example, when he went into Georgia and other earlier kind of annexations. And I think that if we, since I'm a part of the West in a sense, if we had reacted earlier and showed more clearly that we weren't happy, and maybe also opened up some other kind of venues for communication and starting to also show an understanding maybe for Putin's ideas, even if we are not validating them or being okay with them. So I think a lot in the international system, we're not listening to each other, we're not listening to each other's differences. And I think the only way to move forward is to somehow do that, because we need to find ways of reaching each other. And as someone who has studied conflict resolution, that is something that we need to do. You can't reach peace with arms alone. And of course, this sounds naive, and especially for coming from someone Swedish, as Sweden often is being represented as an honest broker in many cases, and a mediator as is Norway. But I do think we need to talk more about perceptions in international relations. And here I'd like to bring in another example, and that is the Gulf states and their energy policy right now, which of course is very shocking and angers especially the United States and causes indirectly a lot of economic repercussions that are very negative. But for the longest time, if we go back to 1973, 1974, Western states' perception that they somehow automatically had a right to these countries' oil resources angered the Arab Gulf states and made them choose to use the oil weapon. I'm not saying that that was the right action, but I'm saying that perception and psychology is playing a role here. It's not only power or brute power, it's also how we are being perceived by others in the international system. So, yes.
Thank you. Milos, you mentioned a little bit, but again, may I ask you the same, do you think the conflict spread to the NATO and the neighboring countries, and how can we avoid?
I think, as the previous colleague said, I think it is highly unlikely at this moment that it will spread out to the NATO countries, unless something happens, but we'll see what the next year will bring. But what I do also think is that it's not in the interest of Europe, immediate interest, to like completely or permanently split with Russia. So, let's imagine that there is a demise of Putin or internal collapse of Russia. This will also have consequences for Europe. New migration waves, political instability that will, of course, reflect on Europe. Potential mismanagement or misuse of nuclear weapons. As much as it is expensive now to support Ukraine in fighting back, I think this is something that will go on a bit on the part of the EU and the United States, meaning supplying with the military equipment, military training, other kind of support. And this is the situation at the moment, because we see that war is apparently far from end, and it will continue for some time like this. What I do like about Anna's intervention here is that as much as we all condemn here what Russia is doing in Ukraine, I was mentioning in my first intervention about the need to reestablish talks. It doesn't mean that the major players in the West had to all of a sudden become friendly with Russia. No, but talking about the things that Putin has for quite some time in the past, was speaking about announcing, in a way, his concerns you know, however, crazy they sounded back in the day, is something that maybe it's time, you know, to start thinking about how to approach this conversation, to hear Russia, what Russia has to say. Of course, while keeping the sanctions, keeping the measures, and essentially keeping the position of the West. This is what is really important. So, if this happens, the chances are even, you know, slighter that the war will spread out and involve countries that are NATO members. But I mean, let's not forget. And Mr. Kiniklioglu was also mentioning that the Turkey can play a mediator role, among other things, because it's a partner country to Ukraine, to Russia. It's also a partner country to the US and to the EU, right? But Turkey is also a NATO member, you know? Let's not forget that. So this, one of these, you know, concerns from the side of the Russian Federation that they don't want to see Ukraine becoming a NATO member, it's not actually the primary or the most honest concern. Because in this example here, you can see that they have a good relationship with the NATO members, so it's a matter also about something else, not just about the NATO membership, in my opinion, even if it's on the border of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Milos. Omar, you are an international lawyer, so I'd like to hear your perspective on that.
Oui, still, on reste sur quelle est la fin de la guerre, c'est ça la question?
Can you tell me in Turkish?
In Turkish,
sorry,
I would like to, but it's in Arabic maybe. But.
Yes.
We stay on the question about the issue.
Yes. So you think that the conflict will spread?
Yes. Okay.
I think you mentioned little, but it's.
Okay. Il faut.
You can expand it.
Yes. On devrait peut-être mettre l'enjeu de la perception, l'enjeu du regard que nous apportons à ce conflit. Je pense qu'après la Seconde Guerre mondiale, il y a eu une forme de paix.
There's no translation.
Maybe we click on the
Numéro 2, number 2.
Yes. May I help you? Yes. 2, I think. Okay. Is it? Okay, please. Yes, we can.
C'est bon?
Okay. Thank you.
Très bien. Donc je disais que, en fait, c'est une question, à mon avis, de perception. Il ne faudrait pas qu'on se trompe de sémantique, ni de point de vue. Il s'agit de donner un regard strictement objectif. Nous ne sommes pas dans l'opinion, mais nous sommes quelque part dans l'analyse scientifique et non pas dans une campagne électorale. Ce que je voudrais éventuellement dire, c'est que dans la Seconde Guerre mondiale, après la Seconde Guerre mondiale, il y a eu une forme de paix. Cette paix est venue avec un équilibre quelque part fragile. Un équilibre fragile qui a comporté en son sein des points de conflit. Je cite la question du Sahara en Afrique du Nord, la question palestinienne au Moyen-Orient, le Timor oriental en Indonésie, la question de Taïwan en Chine, etc. Tout déséquilibre, toute action, initiative de déséquilibre amène à la guerre. Je m'explique, ça a été les États-Unis au Moyen-Orient par rapport à la guerre d'Irak sur la base d'un mensonge qui est une petite bonbonne d'anthrax dans le Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies. Nous avons, ou bien les États-Unis d'Amérique avaient éventuellement exploité la faiblesse de l'Union soviétique et la chute de l'Union soviétique pour avancer ces cartes en matière territoriale. Aujourd'hui, en Russie, qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? La violation des accords de Minsk en 2014. C'est-à-dire que la Russie a demandé à l'Ukraine de ne pas faire avancer éventuellement l'influence de l'OTAN sur ses frontières. 2014, il y a eu un accord entre les deux parties. Cet accord a été violé. Dans la matrice du Kremlin, cela est équivalent à une déclaration de guerre. Et aujourd'hui, la sémantique est importante. Notre ami nous parle des territoires de l'OTAN, que les pays baltes ou les pays scandinaves sont des territoires de l'OTAN. Moi, je pense que si j'ai bien compris, même mon anglais est assez sympathique, est une perception qui est très grave, parce que ce sont des États souverains, d'abord, européens ensuite, civilisés, et non pas des zones militarisées, inféodées à quelques institutions militaires, d'autant plus une institution militaire qui est orientée par une grande puissance qu'est les États-Unis d'Amérique. Moi je dis non, ce sont des États éventuellement souverains qui se réunissent autour d'une institution porteuse de valeurs qu'est l'Union européenne. Donc à partir de là, avoir une perception militarisée des territoires européens, cela confirme éventuellement le regard de la Russie qu'elle porte sur éventuellement ses voisins. C'est justement là les germes de ce conflit qui devraient nous amener à raisonner d'une manière juste sur les termes de paix. Aujourd'hui, si la question des territoires ukrainiens est en jeu pour amener à la paix, moi, à mon avis, et de l'avis de beaucoup d'analystes, c'est la seule issue. Sinon, ça sera une guerre sans fin qui pourrait effectivement, comme a dit le collègue, déteindre sur les pays européens. Qui serait le prochain pays? Surtout que les différents territoires comme la Pologne, ou bien la Roumanie, ou bien l'Allemagne, etc., sont des bases militaires de l'OTAN. Donc jusque-là, la paix européenne reste fragilisée par une initiative sur un territoire ukrainien, mais demain, cela pourrait être généralisé en Europe. Surtout qu'économiquement, cela risquerait d'influencer le pouvoir d'achat et la situation économique des populations européennes, et cela n'est de l'avis de personne. Donc, si la question est vraiment un équilibre géostratégique entre l'influence américaine via l'institution militarisée qu'est l'OTAN sur des territoires pacifiés et civilisés comme l'Union européenne contre le géant russe, cela devrait se résoudre d'une autre manière que de présenter le peuple ukrainien en sacrifice de cet enjeu, comme l'a été présenté le peuple irakien ou le peuple syrien auparavant.
Okay, thank you so much, Omar. And Suat, as we come to the main and subject here again, which countries can help broke the peace deal that would be satisfactory for both Russia and Ukraine? Then we will talk about Turkey's involvement.
Okay.
The first, which countries do you think?
Okay. Before I address that, I just want to have one sentence. This is not only about territory. If you listen to the Russian leadership and the Kremlin media, they are saying Ukraine does not exist. It needs to be annihilated. They are Russians, they just don't know it. So this is about existence and identity. So imagine if the Algerians would say, you Moroccans, you don't exist. You are actually Algerians, but you just don't know about it. So it's not only about territory. It looks as if it is territory, but it's about identity and existence of a people. Now, the Ukrainians are saying, well, we're not Russian. Yes, we have a similar language, but we're not Russian. We are an independent country, internationally recognized, a member of the United Nations. Now, who could be an honest broker? Which countries? I think Turkey is an important element of a potential brokerage of a deal that would make both sides relatively happy. But without the United States and the Europeans' involvement, this is in essence, a European conflict. As much as the German leadership doesn't want to take responsibility, the fact is, this is about Europe. And one reason why it's so differently perceived in Africa is because it's not an African conflict. And had it not been for the grain issue, it would have even had less interest in Africa. But this is a European conflict. The Europeans must take responsibility, and I think the Germans especially have been a huge disappointment. They have all their own issues, but ideally it would be the United States, major European countries like France and Germany and the United Kingdom, and of course Turkey jointly are helping. Turkey has an advantage because the Turks, as I said earlier, have the trust of the Ukrainians by providing the drone technology and many other things that I cannot discuss here. But they also have a personal, especially President Erdogan has a personal relationship with President Putin, where the two sides, despite having a number of huge policy differences, from Libya to Syria to Eastern Mediterranean energy resources, to, but they tend to compartmentalize their relations, and they have managed so far, despite all the odds, to speak to each other and find ways to move forward. So a potential, as I said, this war is not going to end soon. But when the time comes, I think President Erdogan, if he will be still in power next year, will probably be part of that discussion for sure, because he's able...
Can I interrupt you there?
Of course you can.
So do you think he's going to be in power? So it is an important element. So
well, I think this war will extend to next year, May. Will continue. And we have an election next May, as you know, as you are Turkish as well. And who knows? In elections, anything can happen. I mean, he may lose, he may win. If he wins and is still in power...
How will affect it?
If President Erdogan loses, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Well, the new leadership, I don't know who the new leadership would be, but if we believe one of the main parties in the Turkish opposition, they are less friendly towards Russia and Putin, especially the EE party, and have very pro-Ukrainian views. So this would negatively impact potential Turkish brokerage if and when the time comes for a deal, if Erdogan loses the election. But Turkey is not at the size or doesn't have the gravity on its own to brokerage. This is a European conflict. It requires European ownership and, of course, the United States, if and when there are conditions that are ripe for a peace deal.
And do you think the world sees Turkey as a real honest broker here?
I don't know that. President Erdogan is a very charismatic figure. He has his own way of doing business. He's a very transactional actor. He has very little understanding or confidence in a value-based foreign policy debate. It's very transactional, horse trading, if you mean. And Turkey has been one of the main beneficiaries of the conflict, because we are exporting now a lot to Russia, because we are not part of the sanctions regime. Regrettably, I don't agree with this policy, but that's what it is. Turkey has no qualms about energy shortage, because the Russians obviously will continue to pump gas to Turkey. I think in some parts of the world, President Erdogan's ability to speak to both sides and to leverage them is seen as a plus and is respected. But I think in many Western countries, it's seen as not being part of the family, exploiting the situation, and purely seeing it from a selfish perspective rather than acting in concert with, as Turkey is a member of NATO, and also, although technically still a candidate country of the European Union. So I don't know how Erdogan's role in Africa is seen. I have no idea. It would be great if maybe Omar or some others could chip in on that one.
Yes, before I find you here, so I have one more question. So Turkey tried to block or stop NATO expansion. So why do you think Turkey tried to stop NATO expansion?
Well, the official Turkish discourse of Turkey does not want to block NATO expansion. It agreed in the last summit for Sweden and Finland to join. But there are some issues, especially with the Swedes, on what is terrorism, who is a terrorist. PKK demonstrations in Stockholm or other Swedish cities are seen as tacit support by the Swedes. I don't think the Swedes adequately understand how Turkey perceives pro-PKK sentiments in the country, demonstrations. Obviously, Sweden is a very liberal society, and many things, social, civil society, etc., is prospering. But I think eventually Turkey will go along, and Sweden and Finland. Finland has no problem. It's already resolved. It's only Sweden, and I think the new Swedish government is making quite a bit of efforts to meet Turkey's demands. And eventually, I think it will happen. I don't think Turkey will be blocking it.
Thank you. Anna, are there any discussions behind the scenes between EU countries and Russia?
I can't really answer to that question. It's really not part of my expertise, I would say. But I'd like to comment a little bit on what Suad said in regards to Sweden. I think there are a lot of things that are at stake here. We're looking at the immediate solution of the Ukrainian conflict, and that is, of course, our primary concern. But there are other issues at play here too, and I would say that the issue of democracy, the issue of human rights, the issue of authoritarianism, the issue of, the international system, what it's going to look like. So it's much, much more serious than only Ukraine. Although the Ukrainians are paying the immediate price and they're dying as we sit here, right? So, that sounds really dramatic, but that's the truth. But if we talk, for example, about Sweden and Sweden's issue and Erdogan's issue with Sweden, it's essentially how we look at human rights, how we look at democracy, and a liberal democracy. And yes, the new Swedish government are prepared to look at it much more pragmatically than the social democratic government. So the new Swedish government will agree with Turkish definition of the people that Erdogan wants extradited from Sweden as terrorist or having terrorist inclinations. And to what extent that is true, I think that there are most of the people that are being designated by terrorists by Erdogan in the Swedish context would not be qualified as terrorists, for example. There are a few fringe elements. And here, again, I'm not an expert. I can't say anything with absolute certainty, but this is just my perception of the issue, so to speak.
Thank you. And Milos, since you are from Serbia, so I'd like to hear from you again what is Serbian position towards this war in Ukraine.
So firstly, I have to say that I fully agree with Mr. Kiniklioglu. So as much as this conflict has global consequences, it is European conflict in Europe. And I think that once brokering peace are the EU and the US, and the Turkey, of course. But one thing that I want to add to that is already said, is that we have seen already since from the beginning of this war, that bilateral initiatives, like from the French president, to talk to Putin and try to, come to some sense, were futile. So I think this is the moment, particular moment in time, not just today or yesterday or tomorrow, that the EU tries to act together as a union. So of course there will be a country that is at the, let's say, at the forefront of that, like a forerunner, maybe Germany. And there will be countries who will opt out, like for example, Hungary at the moment, who didn't join the sanction packages. But I think this situation should show the unity of the EU and how it deals with the peace and prosperity on its own continent, with the help of the US and the Turkey and others involved. There was also in the preparation for this session, there was also mentioning of are China or other non-allied countries, can they have a part in all this? I mean, probably China could play a specific part, but you know, China and non-allied countries, I mean, they are firstly far away from Ukraine. I mean, it's not only geographically, it's you know, politically and historically. On the other hand, you know, Russia has been increasingly using China as an export market as well. So, and if the war continues and the global trade disruption continue, I think the West will be increasingly suspicious about the non-actions of China, which can also be read as an implicit support to Russia. And I don't think that this is something that China, you know, wants, especially if it wants for their Belt and Road Initiative to be successful. So maybe there is this space, right, for more mediators. So, in terms of reaching for a joint, you know, action for peace. But as I said, the EU and the US. When it comes to Serbia, well, you know, Serbia is the official position of the government in Serbia is not to join the sanctions that were imposed by the EU. And this is a hugely problematic thing because Serbia is a candidate country to join the EU and now is under political pressure because of that. So there is a political price. Although the government has officially condemned, right, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it didn't join the sanctions. And I think this whole situation that we are somehow in the middle and also victims of the circumstance, victims of the war that we have nothing to do with, right? Basically, is on one hand due to the political maneuvering and playing games of politics in Serbia, but on the other hand is also the consequence of I wouldn't say non-action, but slow actions on the side of the EU to integrate the Western Balkans region, as I said at the beginning. So for the lasting peace and stability and the prosperity of the European soil, and if we do have any concerns about the influences from the East leading our region astray, then we have to accelerate somehow the EU accession process. That should be merit-based, of course. That's not an issue, but we have to work on it together and work fast.
Thank you. As you mentioned sanctions, Ömer, may I ask you how to evaluate the sanction policy towards Russia? What is your opinion?
C'est vrai que la politique des sanctions a toujours été une très mauvaise politique. Ça n'a jamais donné de résultats. Et aujourd'hui, nous voyons plus qu'avant que la politique de sanctions est en train d'être profitable à son destinataire, qui est la Russie. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, l'Union européenne, les pays de l'Europe occidentale sont énergétiquement dépendants de la Russie, qui est aussi, d'un point de vue alimentaire, premier exportateur d'engrais, et donc ce qui fait de lui le concurrent du Maroc par rapport au fait qu'il soit le premier producteur de phosphate. Donc la question de sanctions ne marche pas. Pourquoi? Parce que tout simplement, nous sommes dans une nouvelle réalité géopolitique, ce qui veut dire que les États-Unis d'Amérique ou bien ses alliés qui vont mettre en place un système de sanctions n'ont plus le monopole de l'initiative, ce qui fait qu'aujourd'hui, par exemple, tout le continent africain n'est pas dans le jeu des sanctions. Et donc, l'Europe est quelque part piégée par ce système de sanctions, mais cherche des issues avec l'Afrique sur les questions énergétiques, sur les questions alimentaires, ce qui fait aussi par ricochet le jeu de l'économie russe, ce qui fait que la question des sanctions est complètement has-been. De l'autre côté du continent, bien sûr, la Russie a un allié de taille qui est la première économie mondiale, qui est la Chine. Ce qui veut dire qu'en termes de marché, en termes de courroie d'approvisionnement, en termes de circuits économiquement pertinents, le système de sanctions ne peut pas marcher. La Russie n'est pas l'Irak. Et cela, je pense que d'un point de vue intellectuel, Washington n'a pas encore réalisé qu'il faut peut-être qu'elle mette à jour son logiciel géostratégique. Donc si auparavant en Europe, les États-Unis d'Amérique étaient une partie de la solution, aujourd'hui c'est une partie du problème. Moi, dans mon allocution au tout début, j'ai signalé justement le rôle de la Turquie en tant que médiateur, parce que c'est déjà le cas. C'est un pays qui commence à devenir l'une des puissances économiques mondiales et diplomatiques. Donc il est en train de mettre sur la table les différents belligérants. Tant mieux. Malheureusement, la Scandinavie, qui était un grand, et qui l'est encore un grand modèle social-démocrate, est en train de perdre cette neutralité pour devenir le médiateur d'avant. Ça a été le médiateur israélo-palestinien avec Oslo, ça a été le médiateur de beaucoup de conflits, mais aujourd'hui, de par son positionnement anti-russe, bien sûr, il a perdu ce positionnement. Pourquoi pas le Maroc pourrait éventuellement faire le jeu de la médiation. Mais en tout cas, ce qui est certain, c'est que l'Europe n'a absolument aucun intérêt à être en rupture avec la Russie parce que d'abord, elle est dépendante énergétiquement de la Russie. Ensuite, c'est la continuité territoriale du continent. N'oublions pas que la Russie, d'un point de vue civilisationnel, elle est en Europe, elle n'est pas en Asie. Moscou et Saint-Pétersbourg ne sont pas en Asie, sont en Europe. Donc, quelque part, il faut que ces questions de rupture puissent se résoudre le plus tôt possible. Donc oui, il faut qu'il y ait une révision des différentes positions européennes en présentant des solutions plus ou moins concrètes. Il ne s'agit pas là d'annihiler l'identité des uns et des autres. Encore une fois, nous sortons de la stabilité de la Seconde Guerre mondiale où les États constitués qui battent pavillon dans le fronton des Nations Unies sont reconnus par tout le monde. Mais il s'agit de certaines affinités, de certaines histoires culturelles et civilisationnelles que nous ne pouvons pas oublier. L'Ukraine reste la petite Russie. Ça veut dire que si une partie des intellectuels de Moscou clame que l'Ukraine n'existe pas et que c'est russe, ce n'est pas du tout la position politique de la Russie. Nous entendons les éléments de langage et les éléments de justification de la guerre en Ukraine sont liés à la question de la résistance par rapport à l'offensive de l'OTAN, sont liés à la dénazification du territoire ukrainien par rapport au régiment Azov et d'autres réalités nazies au sein du territoire ukrainien. Donc nous n'avons jamais entendu parler de l'annihilation identitaire ukrainienne. Cela peut émaner de certains intellectuels extrêmes, etc., comme ça pourrait être le cas au Maroc par rapport à ses États avoisinants, comme ça pourrait l'être au sein de l'Algérie par rapport à ses États avoisinants, comme ça pourrait l'être à l'intérieur de la Turquie par rapport à la glorification d'une histoire passée, mais cela ne peut être nullement une justification ou un argument ou un alibi pour éventuellement expliquer la situation d'aujourd'hui. Donc je pense que les termes de la paix, c'est que l'Europe puisse recouvrir sa neutralité par rapport à la question de l'initiative russe en Ukraine pour des raisons de pragmatisme économique pur et de pragmatisme sécuritaire pur pour éviter à la région une guerre totale.
Thank you, Amar. So can you just add a little bit how to limit these economic and energy impacts?
Il y a aujourd'hui, comme nous le savons, il y a aujourd'hui un redéploiement des relations afro-européenne, c'est-à-dire que le leadership des anciens impériums ou des anciens impérialismes en Afrique ne sont plus à l'ordre du jour, parce qu'il y a justement de grandes concurrences sur le territoire africain. D'ailleurs, une très très grande présence russe en Afrique en matière de gisement, en matière première. Il y a une très grande présence turque en Afrique. D'ailleurs, je reviens de Guinée la semaine dernière. C'est un territoire qui, à 70%, n'est absolument pas exploité. La Turquie a justement pu tomber sur des gisements gaziers en Guinée. Voilà ce qui va peut-être répondre à la question énergétique par rapport à l'Europe. Donc il y a des filières d'exportation et des filières d'approvisionnement nouvelles qui vont se constituer pour répondre justement à cette rupture entre l'Occident européen et la Russie par rapport à cette question de sanctions, pour excuser un peu le terme simpliste, pour faire plaisir à l'agenda diplomatique américain. Il y a aussi la question de la France qui va vers l'Algérie pour créer de nouveaux partenariats gaziers. Il y a aussi le gazoduc entre le Nigeria et le Maroc qui va rentrer en vigueur et qui va se connecter avec le pipeline Maghreb-Europe par rapport au gaz. Donc il y a tout un redéploiement économique qui est en rupture avec une histoire impérialiste où il y a un grand et un petit. Aujourd'hui, c'est quelque part un dialogue face à face et win-win lié à une question de concurrence des différentes puissances sur le territoire africain. Donc, in fine, le système de sanctions a juste accéléré quelque part la souveraineté de l'Afrique et finalement bénéficie à la Russie. Donc, je pense encore une fois que l'Europe devrait réviser ses différentes positions sur cette initiative russe en Ukraine, et cette révision pourrait lui permettre d'apporter justement des solutions autres que des solutions belligérantes ou des solutions de rupture avec la Russie, ce qui participerait éventuellement à la paix.
Thank you so much, Omar. Now I would like to move to the floor for the question and answer. May I ask you to introduce yourself and whom you directing your question to, please? And, okay, now could you please switch on the air conditioning for us? This subject getting warmer. Thank you. Okay, please, yes. Oh, yes, please, can we have the microphone?
Thank you very much. Anton Giulio Calenda from Italy, Limes Geopolitical Magazine. I would like to ask you, to all the panelists, just one thing. Realistically speaking, if you were in Vladimir Putin's mind at this moment, this point, what would you do? Because it seems to me that Russia found itself in a situation that never forecasted. They thought, all the world thought Russia would have won this war, not even maybe fought this war. Can Russia afford to lose? And what could be the consequences? So what is the way out Putin has in this moment, in your opinion? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonio. Suat, would you like to answer that first?
He has no way out. It was a disastrous miscalculation, as you said. His intelligence people told him that the Ukrainians would fall within 3 days, that he actually had, the initial troops had parade uniforms on them in their package, because they were planning to have a major parade in Kiev. And unfortunately, politicians pay for their wrong decisions. I'm not in a position to tell him what to do. But if he's smart and people, you know, his first priority is regime preservation. So regime preservation requires him a face-saving deal. Perhaps for him the best is that the Dnieper River, the natural boundary, will work for him for the conflict to freeze, de facto freeze. And that the Ukrainians will not push east of the river, and not because they don't want to, but because they may not be able to, either through the lack of European support or midterm elections in the United States and a less willing Republican House of Representatives and Senate to provide critical support for Ukraine. So this would be probably his best case scenario. But even that, I think, could cause him problems in the Kremlin in the medium to long term, because we live in a world where you cannot hide anything anymore. Everything is out there. Despite having huge media dominance and a certain narrative about Nazis in Ukraine and Azov, whatever, everyone knows what's going on. But basically, he will pay for his mistake.
Anna, can we ask you the same question?
I'd rather not peek into Putin's brain, but if I have to, I think in many ways it's kind of a point of no return for him. I think he's lost a lot of faith also actually with regards to his close advisors and people. I mean, it's pretty evident that even if it's very quickly deleted and removed from the social media sphere or even television or whatever, that people aren't happy. And I think if, as I think I agree with you, regime survival, it's his main point. I mean, he will have to find some way out without losing face, and I'm afraid I don't know. I think if we look at economic issues in the world and all those kind of big issues, I think those will be the one that will push the resolution kind of forward. And if not, I don't know what will happen. So I pass it to you.
Well, I couldn't imagine myself either in the head of the President Putin, but certainly I agree. Retreat would mean defeat, and it would also probably, I don't know, but it could also mean his political defeat as well, and political collapse in Russia, and who knows what hides beneath it then. So I think, it's even sad in a way, but there is no turning back for him. But as I said, I don't know. And the important question that you have raised, and the rest of my colleagues also mentioned here, is the question of the immediate advisors and people who, advise, provide options and ideas on what to do. Unless someone else, comes in, I think it is what it is.
Can we hear from you, Omar?
C'est vrai qu'il est très difficile de se mettre à la place de Vladimir Poutine. Déjà que son image elle est un peu impénétrable, on n'arrive pas à lire sa mimique, donc réfléchir à sa pensée est un peu difficile. Mais ce qui est sûr, c'est que ce n'est pas l'initiative en Ukraine, de l'avis de beaucoup d'experts et d'observateurs, n'est pas un coup de tête. C'est-à-dire qu'à partir du changement de situation en Syrie, en la faveur de la Russie a vu qu'il y a quelque chose qui est en train de changer. Il y a eu les accords de Minsk en 2014 qui ont été violés. Il y a tout cet enjeu d'équilibre américo-russe qui est en train de se redéployer suite à l'effondrement de l'Union soviétique. Donc aujourd'hui, Vladimir Poutine est quelque part un porteur de projets. Il a des philosophes autour, il a des économistes autour, il a des oligarques, des monopolistes, des gens qui ont le monopole de l'énergie, des milliardaires qui sont autour. Donc quelque part, ils ont réfléchi à la prospective. Moi, ce qui me paraît quelque part intéressant à signaler, c'est que aujourd'hui l'Europe paie le prix de cette guerre. Les États-Unis, en matière de financement, n'est pas très investi dans l'aide de l'Ukraine, et d'ailleurs il y a même des rapports des différentes administrations américaines qui signalent que 70% du financement américain pour l'armement de l'Ukraine qui est destiné au gouvernement ukrainien est tout simplement volé. Ce n'est pas moi qui le dis, ce sont les différents rapports américains. Donc là, il y a quelque part un laisser-faire ou bien un laisser-aller pour ne pas réellement mener une vraie guerre contre la Russie. D'ailleurs, même la Russie n'a pas trop déployé son armement. Ce qui m'inquiète, c'est que tout cela puisse épuiser l'Europe et puisse détourner la Russie de son éventuel regard et une éventuelle protection par rapport à l'Iran qui est en train éventuellement de préparer quelque chose à l'intérieur, donc toute la révolution intérieure au sein de l'Iran qui pourrait amener à faire réfléchir les Américains à éventuellement enfin attaquer l'Iran et que l'Ukraine ne soit qu'une politique de diversion par rapport à ce qui se préparerait en Iran, ce qui serait éventuellement inquiétant.
Thank you. And next, please. Any more questions? Yes, please. The lady in front. Thank you.
Alors, mon intervention va être en français.
Just one second, please. We just need. Thank you. Yes.
Kenza Gilal, étudiante chercheuse en master, deuxième année master commerce international à l'université Mohammed 5 de Rabat. Ma question, c'est, si vous permettez, quelles sont les vraies causes qui ont conduit l'ONU, autant qu'organisation internationale, on peut dire qu'il est le gardien de la paix internationale, qui a conduit à l'échec dans la prévision et la gestion de la crise russe-ukrainienne. Et on sait que les organisations internationales peuvent jouer le rôle de médiateur, mais peut-être que la Russie prévoit que les organisations internationales ne gardent plus la neutralité et font partie de l'idée que la Russie a tort et que c'est les Ukrainiens qui ont raison. Moi, personnellement, je ne défends personne, mais est-ce que vraiment les sacrifices que l'Ukraine et le monde ont fait pour l'adhésion à l'OTAN mérite, et parce qu'on ne parle plus d'une guerre, une simple guerre qui touche les deux pays, mais ça touche la scène internationale. Et aussi, on parle de la sécurité internationale, la sécurité énergétique, et surtout, le plus dangereux, c'est la sécurité alimentaire. Et je vais juste ajouter que je ne défends aucune partie.
And can I get your question in short? What was the question, please?
The question is, est-ce que vraiment les sacrifices faits, qui ont menacé la sécurité internationale et la sécurité alimentaire, on n'a pas pu faire autrement, et la guerre n'a jamais eu de bon visage.
Thank you. Who would like to start? Anna?
hope it's okay that I could respond in French, but my French is a little bit rusty, so I will speak in English. I'm not entirely sure that I understood, but I will respond to you the way I thought the question was posed. And I like to say that a lot of times we have a lot of, we demand a lot of the United Nations to be involved in peacemaking and so forth. I mean, it's important to remember that the United Nations system is made up of states that have their own interests. And of course, Russia is a very important player in the United Nations system. So I think that we shouldn't be too naive. I mean, in a sense, if we look at how the United Nations was set up, after 1945 and so forth, I mean, it was set up in a way to benefit the great powers. And then, of course, a lot of things have grown up, outgrowth from the United Nations to deal with a lot of issues having to do with hunger and so forth. But at the end of the day, the United Nations are made up of states with specific interests. So those states need to come together and work together, and if they don't want to, if they disagree, then there won't be any solutions. So that's something I'd like to say.
Suat?
Anna summarized it really well, but just adding to that, there's two things that I want to say. One is, when I was at your age, I also thought that that decision makers are rational human beings, and that they tend to take rational decisions. When I was writing a paper, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and it was not a very rational decision, and he paid dearly for that. President Putin is, his government is a Security Council's permanent member. The country of the Security Council, permanent member of the Security Council, is attacking a member of the an internationally recognized member of the United Nations. You know, what else can we say about the United Nations that makes it so dysfunctional? Because, as Anna said, members have their own interests. And in this case, the Russian Federation, which is a permanent member of the Security Council, has attacked an internationally recognized member of the United Nations. And I did too, actually, when I was at school, I also thought that the United Nations was not doing enough. The United Nations was just too ineffective. Well, that's not the world we live in. The world we live in are basically made up of nation states who have their own interests. And if my memory doesn't serve me wrong, one of my instructors at university said that the world is managed chaos. Somewhat managed chaos. So the expectation that the United Nations can fix things or bring peace is really not in confluence with the world we live in, unfortunately. But let's reiterate. What has happened on the 24th of February 2022 is that a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council has attacked a legitimate member of the United Nations. Let that sink in.
Thank you. Milos? Okay, you want to add anything, Omar?
Juste pour réagir à la question de la demoiselle, c'est une bonne question dans la mesure où vous interpellez la crise des organisations internationales et leur légitimité. Les Nations Unies ont été l'instrument quelque part de paix et de sécurité dans le monde suite à la Seconde Guerre mondiale et à ces équilibres difficiles. Aujourd'hui, quelque part, la légitimité de cette organisation internationale a été affectée par différentes infractions au droit international, notamment par les fondateurs de la même organisation. C'est-à-dire lorsqu'on va parler de la Seconde Guerre du Golfe, c'était une infraction bien sûr au système onusien. Lorsqu'on va parler de l'attaque en Libye, c'était une infraction au système onusien. Lorsqu'on va parler aux différentes attaques qu'a connues la Syrie, c'est une infraction au système onusien. À l'Afghanistan, le Vietnam, j'en cite, et des meilleurs. Donc aujourd'hui, bien sûr, que les instruments ou les organisations internationales en tant qu'acteurs du droit international répondent au rapport de force. Il faut le dire clairement. Les relations internationales sont un jeu d'intérêt, un jeu de rapport de force. Nous sommes dans une rationalité légale, comme chez Max Weber, donc nous sommes dans une approche rationnelle légale, mais dépendamment des intérêts de tout un chacun. Aujourd'hui, la Russie a saisi la brèche qu'il y a une déstabilisation de l'Occident fort, donc elle occupe éventuellement son espace par rapport à une phobie historique qu'elle a, que l'Occident a toujours tenté de l'encercler. Nous nous souvenons de Napoléon, d'ailleurs, le fameux ouvrage de Léon Tolstoï, Guerre et paix, le décrit si bien, qui a connu une très grande défaite dans l'hiver russe. Nous nous souvenons de la Seconde Guerre mondiale avec Adolf Hitler, qui a aussi tenté d'envahir la Russie, le Japon aussi, qui même si géographiquement il est en Orient, il est civilisationnellement ou géopolitiquement, il est positionné en Occident. Nous nous souvenons de la Suède aussi, qui a mené combat contre la Russie. Donc cet immense empire russe a toujours été quelque part sujet à tentative d'encerclement. Aujourd'hui, l'Amérique a appris de cette histoire et essaye un peu de frapper à distance, notamment en utilisant quelques États comme éventuellement l'Ukraine aujourd'hui.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, please. This microphone is coming.
Hi everybody, my name is Ranim and I am a first-year student in engineering at Lancy School. My question is, I would like to know what's the US role in this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and could this lead to World War III if this continues in the future? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rain. Who would like to answer this question? Please, Suat.
The United States is one of the main actors of the global order that we have. With all its shortcomings, with all its problems, and as Omar said, with all its injustices in many cases, in Syria, in Libya, in Iraq, etc. So the United States has an interest in maintaining whatever rule-based order we have. It may not look as rule-based to you, but it has certain references. So it has a major interest in maintaining that order. As we said at the very beginning of this session, this is not only about Ukrainian territory or how Russians feel about Ukrainian identity. This is also about what kind of world we will live in, what kind of rules will be prevalent, whether a multipolar world will emerge or not, as many people have been entertaining for years now. And of course, I think it also has relevance to China and Taiwan. The Chinese are watching very carefully what's going on in Ukraine and how unexpectedly, the West has united within NATO, despite the Germans and Italians and some others who are not really fully on board. Overall, the European response to the crisis, to the conflict. The United States' role at the moment is actually providing major military support so that Ukraine can liberate their territories. Despite, in my view, it is a European conflict, it should have been the Europeans defending and helping Ukraine. So the United States is actually, the United States taxpayer is paying for European security as they have been for a very long time. And this is a big issue. Anyone who follows US politics, it's a big issue in the United States, rightly so. That's what the United States' role is. But I'm not American, but many Americans view that the major confrontation between the United States and China is the actual big problem or big fight for our global existence. And therefore, the Americans want to make sure that territorial aggression is not accepted and that the United States leadership will do, at least this leadership, will do everything in its power to reverse it and maintain whatever order with its shortcomings we have will remain.
Thank you. Yes, Anna.
I'd just like to add, I mean, United States is asking itself a lot of questions about its leadership role in the world. It keeps becoming brought in by various actors, and this was not a conflict that it wanted to be involved in. But as you said so rightly, I mean, the United States is paying billions of dollars, and it's become actually one issue for the November elections. And if there is another president, if the war goes on, which I don't hope, things might change. I mean, it's enormous amounts of money that is being spent, and the American public do not necessarily agree, or not all the American public does not necessarily agree with that. So that's important to know. So the United States has a lot of democratic problems of its own. So this is a really crucial kind of war for the United States also. It's about democracy against authoritarianism in a way. That's how the Biden administration is trying to represent it as, and I tend to agree in some ways that it actually is.
Thank you. Okay, last one, please.
Je vais poser ma question en français.
Yes.
Je suis Chatibi Yassine, chargé d'études stratégiques à l'Office national des chemins de fer. Je vais m'adresser spécialement à M. Omar. On constatait que parmi les répercussions du conflit russo-ukrainien, c'était la rupture de la distribution du gaz russe. Et vous venez de dire tout à l'heure que ça a donné la main pour d'autres pays, en particulier en Afrique, et plus particulier le Maroc, pour faire des deals ou bien des conventions de redistribution de gaz pour faire absorber ces résultats. Et vous parlez aussi le fait que l'Union européenne devrait revoir la politique de sanctions adressée à la Russie. Est-ce que vous ne voyez pas que le fait de revoir cette politique va par la suite bouleverser ou bien va ruiner l'ensemble de ces conventions plus tard? En Afrique, les deals en Afrique, et spécialement pour le Maroc. Merci.
Bon. Très bien. Alors, je n'ai juste une petite remarque. Je n'ai pas dit que la guerre en Ukraine était liée à une question gazière. C'est un peu plus compliqué que ça. Je pense que c'est une ligne de front entre, comme l'a dit la collègue, entre deux projets de civilisation, mais je ne mettrai pas les mêmes termes sur le projet de civilisation, mais en tout cas, entre l'Occident et la Russie, la ligne de front actuelle, avant c'était la Syrie, aujourd'hui c'est l'Ukraine. Bon, ça c'est un point de vue qui est partagé par plusieurs observateurs. Maintenant, effectivement, les malheurs des uns font le bonheur des autres, c'est-à-dire que les sanctions qui ont été faites par les Européens, sur bien sûr impulsion américaine, ont amené aussi bien les Russes que les Européens à aller voir plus ou moins vers l'Afrique et l'Asie. Pourquoi? Parce que tout simplement, les Européens se sont mis dans leur propre piège, ne peuvent plus s'approvisionner de la Russie. Donc ils ont besoin de différents gisements, notamment en Afrique. Lorsqu'on parle du Nigeria ou de l'Algérie, ce sont des viviers en termes de gaz. Lorsqu'on parle de bauxite, on parle de Guinée, toute l'Afrique occidentale, ce sont des viviers en matières premières. Donc effectivement, la Russie, comme les Européens, sont obligés de se retourner vers l'Afrique. Sauf que, il y a une évolution en Afrique qui fait que les anciens empires, donc la France et l'Angleterre, le Portugal, l'Espagne, etc., sont en train de perdre de l'influence en Afrique, avant même la guerre en Ukraine. Et donc le positionnement de nouvelles puissances que sont la Russie, la Turquie et même un petit État plus ou moins instable comme Israël commence à avoir de l'influence sur le territoire africain. Donc aujourd'hui, c'est un free ride vers les matières premières. Et donc l'histoire des sanctions qu'a voulu imposer les Américains aux Russes à travers l'Europe est en train de désagréger l'Europe. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes en train de vivre des manifestations au sein de l'Union européenne pour demander à ce qu'il y ait la levée des sanctions contre la Russie, parce que l'hiver arrive et donc risquerait d'être très dur si les Européens n'arrivent pas à se mettre en accord avec les différentes nations africaines qui, elles, sont sous influence russe. Je rebondis sur ce que vous avez dit pour redonner une autre analyse. Il est clair, la question initiale dans un dossier pénal en droit, c'est à qui profite le crime. Il est clair qu'aujourd'hui, tout le monde tire bénéfice de la guerre en Ukraine, et même la Russie en tire bénéfice. Les Américains en tirent bénéfice, l'Afrique en tire bénéfice, la Chine en tire bénéfice. Qui est la victime de cette guerre? C'est l'Europe et l'Union européenne. Parce que le vrai concurrent des États-Unis d'Amérique, ce n'est pas la Russie. La vraie économie libérale, innovante, créative, intellectuelle et culturelle, c'est l'Europe. Et donc, quelque part aujourd'hui, une Europe qui est sous influence de cette guerre est du bénéfice, bien évidemment, des États-Unis. Donc nous nous posons la simple question, est-ce que cette guerre n'avait pas pour objectif éventuellement d'accélérer la désagrégation de l'Europe après avoir utilisé l'Europe comme une espèce de mirage ou une espèce de rêve alternatif à l'Union soviétique de l'époque?
Thank you, Omar. And thank you for the questions. I just need 2 more minutes from the organizer. It was very good and rich discussion. Before we leave, I would like to ask just one key message from today. Can we just start with you, Omar? Just 10 seconds.
Le mot de la fin.
Maybe English, yes.
Maybe in English, we are all against war, and we support the suffer of the people of Ukraine, but we have to make the right responsibility of this suffering of people. Maybe the right responsibility is not coming from Russia, even if the military initiative in Russia is in front line of images in MEDays.
Thank you. Milos?
I think we need more unity in Europe. Now is the time, so that the common foreign security policy can live up to its expectations. And what is it made for? And at some point, I think that the EU, together with the US, has to re-establish links with Russia in terms of negotiations. Because Ukraine and Russian Federation may be the warring parties, but parties in conflict actually are also the EU and the US.
Thank you. Anna?
So first of all, I just have to say that the United States is not benefiting from the conflict in Russia. That's very clear to me. What I would like to say, I think that even beyond European unity, we need more multilateral discussions and understandings. I think we need to reorient and revisit how we cooperate in the international system. The international system needs to be reformed in some way. I don't know how, but I think there is clear that there are a lot of things that haven't been kind of solved with regards to post-imperialism, post-colonialism, all sorts of issues that are not directly related, but that come up with regards to Ukraine. And yeah, that's what I'd like to say.
Thank you. And Suat?
I think the way I look at it is, the way Anna said, this is really a struggle between societies who want to have freedom and do not want to have an opinion imposed upon them by an external power, by force. So there's a lot more at stake. And I think we need to recognize that this is not about some small town in Donetsk or Luhansk, or whether Crimea has historically been, in the Russian psyche as part of Russia, etc. This is really about what kind of world we are willing to live in. Do we want, as free citizens, another country that might be stronger than us to impose its will forcefully by killing people, by raping women, by taking over territory? Or do we want everyone to respect their borders and live freely? If 70-odd% of Ukrainians want to join the European Union, they should be able to do so. If 80% or something Ukrainians want to join NATO, and this is their free will, it's not being exposed, they should have the right to do so. My last comment is I really have great respect for the Ukrainian people. Glory to Ukraine and those heroic people that are fighting in the year of 2022, a heroic battle for their lives, for their families, for their country. I've not seen this sort of patriotism and this heroism a long time. When the Taliban was coming towards Kabul, the guys running Kabul at the time, they ran away like chicken. When President Zelensky got a call from President Biden about having him, out of Kiev, he said something that you don't hear very often these days. I don't need a ride, I need ammunition to fight. So I am very much, not only as a Turkish citizen who has a strong interest in the outcome of this conflict, but also as a free man who values democracy and freedom. I have great respect for Ukraine, and I will end with Slava Ukraini. Glory to Ukraine.
Okay, thank you, Suat. This is the end of our session. Thank you. I'm so grateful for our speakers. So let's say thank you to them together.